If you're new to pixel art, or if you're an indie game developer that is looking for a way to create pixel art in a very easy and effective way while at the same time creating something that is highly atmospheric, I have some tips for you in this video. A good starting point, in my opinion, to get into pixel art for your own game project or whatever project you're working on, or just as art in itself, is to use a silhouette style of graphics that are easy to produce and highly effective. What I'm referring to is, for example, a scene like this, which you can use in your game as a cutscene or an opening scene. But depending on your type of game you're making, it can also be the in-game graphics that you see as a player all the time. Think of games like Limbo that have used this kind of silhouette style in the past. I started creating this scene by putting down some colors, which consists of a couple of green tones from dark to light, and I'm just laying down the basic shapes of the clouds that you will see in the background of the final image. By the way, as you can see, I'm using Aseprite as my tool of choice. And in this case I used a canvas size of 320 by 200 pixels. So now that the clouds are done, I started picking the darkest green color, which seems like black, but it's not exactly black, it's just a dark green. And I was drawing the landscape. And with the brightest green color in my palette, I was putting down the sun that is now setting. And now I was starting to just draw some simple shapes as silhouettes on the landscape that I just created. So I'm going here for some farmhouse scene. As you can see, I created this first building and some fences, and now a second building. Playing around with some lit windows and a door frame. Just little pixels that indicate the details. A little chimney on top of the roof and some other fence next to the house. As you can see here, by using silhouettes, you can focus really on the shapes of objects to make them readable, while not having to deal so much with coloring or any other advanced techniques that you can use for pixel art. So I thought this landscape needs some trees, so I was putting down a tree. And also some bushes. I started making another tree in the corner, which I ended up not being too happy with, so I was going a bit back and forth, as you can see, with getting the shape down. I started adding some grass details, and on the other side of the image another tree that kind of frames the overall image in a nice way. The tree leaning in from a kind of a hill or mountain. So I went back to the other tree because I was not too happy with the shape. I started to make the trunk a bit less straight to make it look more natural, which in the end I think looked better than the first version. After doing this, I was going back to the overall impression of the image and experimenting a bit with the height of the cloud layers, and I figured that everything should be raised a little bit, and that the actual black or dark green landscape part of the image should be a bit more prominent here, just from an overall layout perspective of the image. After that, I started to do some simple shading, because now, after having determined where the sun was, which is the major light source in this image, I could start putting down some lighting shapes, always thinking of where does the light come from and how does it hit this surface if it was an actual 3D object. And also this is much simpler if you're working with silhouettes like this. because you can omit a lot of details which pixel art already does in itself, but using a silhouette style of image even takes this a step further to simplification, which helps you a lot in the beginning to just get down shapes right with not so much experience when doing complicated objects or shapes. So I was putting lighting on all these objects that are in the scene, always taking into consideration where does the light come from. So after I put down the lighting shapes, I was already quite happy with the results, but I figured that the image overall was lacking a little main subject. You could say that at this point in the image, the main subject would be the two farmhouses and the overall vibe that is created by the green coloring. But I felt that this was not prominent enough to really justify that this is the main subject of the image. And in this case, I, as you can see, had no clear vision before I started putting down pixels. I had a palette, but I didn't really have a main idea of what I was going for here other than showing you some silhouette shapes. And with this overall green atmosphere that I ended up with and this farm landscape, I thought a good idea would be to make this a little sci-fi setting set like in the 1950s somewhere in the US by drawing a flying saucer and also giving the image a little bit of story context by letting this flying saucer use a stereotypical tractor beam that is pulling in a cow from the fields. So I started creating this cow, which took me also a couple of minutes to get the shape down right because the size I was giving myself here was quite limited and you have only a few pixels to work with to make this really readable as what it should be. So I was going back and forth with the head structure of the animal and also with the number of legs that are visible. I was trying to make all 4 legs visible, but in the end it ended up to be too detailed for the size of the sprite that I was going for here. So in the end I went more for a flat 2D kind of shape to just make it more readable. After I created the cow that was being abducted by the spaceship, I figured that the size of the cow was actually too big from a perspective point of view, because if the tractor beam as currently shown is disappearing behind the hill, the cow would be, from a perspective point of view, way too big if you compare it to the house and the other objects in the scene. So I had 2 choices here to fix that. Either I would shrink the cow to be even smaller than it already was, which I tried here, but it turned out to be not readable at all. So I figured I'd rather keep the size of the cow and instead let the beam be more towards the viewer, essentially fixing the perspective issue in that way. So I extended the beam to be originating from this spot that is more close to the camera, if you will, and I worked on a few more details regarding shading until I was happy with the result. Another problem now occurred, or I realized that since I didn't have a plan to start with, I created another issue now with the lighting, because now that the beam was more to the front of the camera or closer to the viewer, the lighting on the 2 farm buildings was not correct anymore, because currently they had the lights coming from the sun and not yet from the light beams. So I figured the light on these 2 objects at least should be coming now more from the beam, which is what I started to do now. So both the farmhouse and this other building, I adjusted the light to come more from the beam that is now more close to the camera. And you could do the same for the trees, but I figured at this point this was good enough as a demonstration and as a piece as it is. And I think it works as a scene in itself, as a still image. It conveys a little story, but it also kind of now asked for the flying saucer to be animated and actually pulling in the cow from the fields and to make this an animation. So I did that too, and if you're interested to see how this turned out, then you can watch this video next.